All right, we had some big D-Hop news going to the Titans. What's his dynasty value? Do we buy him? Do we sell him? What are we thinking about him? Before we get into it, guys, do us a quick favor there. Smash that like, smash that subscribe. Hammer, start us off here. What do you think about the D-Hop move?
Not only do I have 3 words, I have 3 letters. WTF. DeAndre Hopkins, why are you going to Tennessee? Please answer me that. Why are you going to Tennessee? I felt like there were so many, not so many per se, but there were better options out there. And I think you'll agree with me. And the one that pops to mind is Buffalo. But initially looking at it, I'm like, low volume offense, Ryan Tannehill. And I just wonder what that will look like. And it doesn't excite me. It's so underwhelming from a fantasy standpoint, and even from a real life standpoint. It just underwhelms me all the way around. So I don't love it as a whole if I'm looking from a macro perspective. Now, if I'm looking from a micro perspective, my tune will change a little bit from the standpoint of I think DeAndre Hopkins could be really good in certain spots, but when you're talking about consistency and you're talking about dynasty, not a ton of value. So while I do think he would be pretty good as a flex option, maybe a wide receiver 3, there seems like there's such limited upside here with DeAndre Hopkins going to a very low pass volume offense with a quarterback, as I said, that nobody on God's green earth is very excited about when you talk about Ryan Tannehill. So very underwhelming. I do think he could be valuable in some spots, but from a season long perspective, I don't think there's much upside there. But his days of, 10 grabs on 13 targets for 125 yards are over. They're over. So don't expect that from DeAndre Hopkins.
Yeah, I mean, I would say he's a mid to late wide receiver 2. You probably want him as like your wide receiver 3 on your team. Like you said, low volume offense. I don't think necessarily it matters a ton for DeAndre Hopkins. He's always been a guy that commands targets. He's always played with shitty quarterbacks, so I think he can produce, but it's very low possibility he produces for you wide receiver 1 numbers.
And he's
And
older
again,
now.
now again he is what, 31. He hasn't stayed healthy the last 2 seasons. He missed the last couple games last season. He missed a bunch of games this season before that with the MCL. So he's missed time, and now he goes to Tennessee where everybody says, that's where the wide receivers go to die, and it is true to a certain extent, but obviously those guys were old and kind of on their way out already. And I think for Hopkins, at least, he's played well, but are the injuries going to continue? That's obviously going to be the biggest thing, because some of these other guys, like, when you look at Andre Johnson, I mean, he was 35 once he went to Tennessee, but he only played 9 games. Randy Moss, when he started breaking down at 33, he wound up playing for 3 teams that year. 8 games for the Titans, and then you got Julio Jones, who started to decline at 31 and then went to Tennessee and played 10 games, but he played 9 games the season before that. So, you look at some of those things and you say, okay, well, some of these players are older. They started breaking down already beforehand.
Yeah.
The only thing was he was very successful last year, playing with even, Colt McCoy and, once Kyler went down, and then obviously the last 2 games he got hurt. So we'll see what Hopkins can do. But I think, yeah, he's in that kind of low end wide receiver 2 range. I mean, in Dynasty, I'm not touching him. I'd rather just, take my chances on somebody else. He's worth about, Isaiah Pacheco, A-Chain, an early second round pick, Mike Evans. He's kind of in that kind of range there. And if I have DeAndre Hopkins, I'm probably trying to sell him, but you probably almost can at this point. I mean, people really don't like the spot. I mean, some people may. So, I guess you can feel out what GMs feel, but you might have to wait till he has a big game and then try and sell him at that point.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I just think that the one thing I always bring up about DeAndre Hopkins is, especially in his prime and even towards the latter half of his prime, even when he got injured, he would, like, if he was on the injury report that week, you felt good about him playing. And the last 2 years, he hasn't been able to do that. Now, I know he had a 6-game suspension last season, and that was kind of a blessing in disguise, because that kind of, those last 10 games or so, you felt a little bit better about him being able to play 10 games as opposed to 17 games. I don't like it overall. Now, if he went to Buffalo, I've been harping on this. If he went to Buffalo, I would absolutely love him in that mid wide receiver 2 range, just solid, steady production from a quarterback like Josh Allen. But going to Tennessee, man, it just really devalued it, kind of took the air out of it. Because remember, over the last week and a half, 2 weeks or so, the big news is where's DeAndre Hopkins going to go once the Cardinals released him. We were kind of hanging around waiting for that news. And I think we all kind of just felt deflated when it was like Tennessee. Ugh. Tennessee, Jesus Christ, really? Selling him is going to be very difficult because I just don't think there's a market out there for a 30-plus year old wide receiver with a ton of mileage on him in one of the lowest volume offenses.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you had DeAndre Hopkins, the time to sell him was a year ago, maybe even 2 years ago. That would have been really the time to sell him and come off. Now, with his age, it's going to be very hard to get anything, of value, especially in the current situation that he's in, because I feel like a lot of people just don't like it.
And I think an interesting point, too, is that a lot of people who had DeAndre Hopkins, once he got released by Arizona, were waiting because the juxtaposition of him going to Buffalo versus Tennessee just completely, tipped the scales. Because if he goes to Buffalo, what's his value? And I brought this up on a previous episode where if he goes to Buffalo, his value is really solid. People would pay up for him. And even I would still be on the sell side because his value would have increased had he went to a Buffalo. But the fact that he's on Tennessee now really just kind of puts a damper on his value.
I mean, and we know, wide receiver like 15 to 35 are typically in the kind of same range when we look at WARP data. I feel like he's just kind of
another guy.
It's just not worth it. There's just so many other guys you can get. So if you can come off of him and get some assets or tier down, I'd love to do that. Who could we tier down to? Can we tier down to? Let's look at wide receivers. We tier down to I was gonna say Sky Moore Plus, but the hype has been getting up there for Sky. DeAndre Hopkins on Keep Trade Cut is wide receiver 40. Right in the range of Elijah Moore, Amari Cooper, Deontay Johnson. I'd rather have any of those guys than D-Hop.
I would agree.
After Hopkins, you've got Bateman, Keenan Allen, Kadarius Toney, Jonathan Mingo. I'll take any of those guys, and a little plus for Hopkins if that's even possible. They might be too close in the range, but give me Marvin Mims plus, Jaden Reed plus. I'll take that to get off of D-Hop.
Yeah. I would tend to agree, especially younger guys with some upside.
A.J. Dillon, Antonio Gibson.
Give me all those guys.
Roshan Johnson, Tank Bigsby. Give me all those guys plus, and you can have D-Hop. All right, well, that's going to wrap it up for the video on D-Hop. Guys, let us know down there in the comments. What do you think about the move for DeAndre Hopkins? What do you think about his dynasty value? What does that do for you now that he is on the Titans? Where do you have him in your rankings?